Good morning. Welcome to our public forum today on Russia's war against Ukraine at 1 year, assessing the ongoing situation from above and on the ground. So we have someone on the ground in Ukraine, in Kiev, Kun Karuna Bokamsi, journalist, a Thai journalist. She's based there for the time being. She'll be beaming in via Zoom at about 11 o'clock. So we want to kind of plan around that. Before we get to the proceedings, let me invite, very important task for me, to invite the Dean of the Faculty, Ajahn Prakarn Siriprakov, Professor Prakarn Siriprakov, to give us some welcome opening remarks. Ajahn Prakarn, Chen Kap.
Okay, Swadee. Welcome to the Faculty of Political Science. This is what we call the Social Innovation Hub, where you enjoy the facilities. And thank you everyone for coming today. Here's my opening remarks. For the fourth EU ISIS Public Forum of the year, Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to ISIS Public Forum on a topic that has been at the forefront of the global politics for the past year. It has been over 1 year since Russia invaded Ukraine, an event that has had significant ramifications for the international community. The Russian invasion of Ukraine in the past year has had several serious implications for Ukraine and the international community. First, the invasion clearly violates Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. This undermines the fundamental principles of international law and the concept of state sovereignty. In this connection, we have seen global and regional responses against Russia's invasion. The invasion has led to international condemnation and calls for Russia to withdraw its forces from the Ukraine. The conflict has also resulted in economic sanctions being imposed on Russia by several communities, which has further escalated tensions. Second, the invasion has created geopolitical tensions between Russia and Ukraine, as well as with other countries in the region of beyond. This has heightened concerns about regional stability and the potential for further conflict. Recently, we have witnessed Finland's accession to NATO, with Sweden waiting in line to be the next very shortly. This has significant security implications for Europe and the international community, particularly given the current tensions between Russia and the West. Will this move deter or escalate the tension in the future? It is something this seminar may give us some assessment. Third, the invasion has resulted in a humanitarian crisis, with thousands of people being displaced and forced to flee their homes. The conflict has also led to civilian casualties and deterioration of living conditions in the affected areas. In addition, the conflict has had a significant economic impact on Ukraine, with the country facing a sharp decline in its economy and investment due to the instability and uncertainty created by the invasion. Today, we will hear valuable assessment on the issue from the EU and Swedish ambassadors, as well as our former Thai Foreign Minister, Ambassador Kasit Pirom. Also, we are fortunate to have Ms. Karuna Bokamsi, a leading Thai journalist who will join us live from the Ukraine. I am sure we are excited to hear and learn from her first-hand experience and observation on the ground. I'm confident that today's seminar will be an encouraging and thought-provoking experience for all participants, and I look forward to the discussion that lie ahead. I hope all of you will enjoy the ensuing discussion. Thank you very much for coming and welcome to the Public ISIS Forum. Thank you so much. Thank you, participants.
Thank you. ขอบคุณครับอาจารย์ประกรณ์ครับ So before I proceed, I also need to say that I want to acknowledge that my director of ISIS, Dr. Pong Pisut Busabarat, Dr. Paul cannot be with us today, so I'm standing in for him. Today we have a very heavy and consequential topic, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and this has gone on for 14 months now. I think that we've had a series on this war. Initially, right after the war, about a month after, we had an event, and at that time, the sentiment back then and now, I think it's a little bit different, and I'll go into this a little bit. I'm going to ask the Ambassador of the EU, Ambassador of Sweden, Ambassador David Daly of EU, Ambassador Jun Alstrom of Sweden, to speak for maybe 10 minutes or so, 10, 12 minutes, with some flexibility, before we we asked Kun Karuna Bokamsi, who I hope can hear us. She then will then beam in at about 11 o'clock or so for 15 minutes, 12 minutes up to her. And then we'll proceed to Ambassador Kasit Pirom, who used to be our foreign minister in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. Look, the ambassador's sentiment then and now qualitatively different, but there's a lot of continuity. I mean, there's no doubt that the Russian war against Ukraine is a violation, it's a blatant violation of international law, of the UN Charter, the notion of territorial integrity, sovereignty. This is what we know as how our international system works, and if this is allowed to stand, then that would undermine and erode the international system as we know it, and it would be to the detriment of all countries, especially smaller countries. Smaller countries have to rely on a rules-based international system in order to function, to operate, to survive. If this kind of aggression is allowed, then there's no end to it. Now, after 14 months, I have to say, I have some students here. We just had an article about, we just went over an article on Russia's coming collapse. It was written in about mid-2022. And at that time, Russia had failed to invade and take over Ukraine on multiple fronts. If you recall, after the initial invasion, February 24th, after that in March, it looked like Russia was going to take over the whole of Ukraine. And Ukrainian defense was fierce, determined, was able to repel the Russian invasion with NATO support, US, UK, EU. And then, you saw Russian invasion not only repulsed, but retreated. You saw retreat. And then a new front, a new campaign in the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine, and linking that eastern Ukraine to the south, to Crimea. That's where the battle is now. That's where the battle is now. The sentiment over this past year, I have to say, the initial outrage was underpinned by a series of United Nations resolutions. First resolution, early March 2022, was to condemn the invasion. And that was very clear. And then by October, to condemn the annexation of eastern parts of Ukraine. And then again, more recently, very sorry about that banging noise. Our university has endless construction. They never stop constructing something. So we'll try to tell them to be quiet for the next hour. So, more recent UN resolution to condemn, from the invasion and annexation, and after the 1-year anniversary. But I also have to say to ambassadors that there have been some sentiments that are having some second thoughts and doubts about where this war is going. So, for example, recently we saw the president of Brazil visiting China and taking issue with perhaps the trend in the international system, and that maybe suggesting that there should be an alternative to the US dollar, but that was a reflection of the frustration, I think, on the West. So I'm going to point out the multiple fractures we're seeing between the global South and the West. We used to call this the West and the rest. Within EU, President Macron went to Beijing, very conciliatory, not so adversarial. I noticed, even within Germany, even within European countries, there are growing differences of opinion. In Germany, the president, the chancellor, more conciliatory. The foreign minister of Germany went to Beijing and took a very hard-lined stance, posture against rights and freedom, China, and so on. So that's on one side. The multiple fractures we're seeing after 14 months of war, Russian war against Ukraine. And then we're also seeing, on the other side, China's backing for Russia. Not only the President Biden went to visit President Zelensky in Kiev, but President Xi Jinping also has visited President Putin in Moscow. So the war is widening diplomatically, at least diplomatically, and there is kind of the dynamics on the ground in the region. I can tell you in ASEAN. Prime Minister of Malaysia also visited Beijing, and Thailand, as we know, abstained from the vote to condemn the annexation last October. So there's some sentiments now that are not opposed to the war, but maybe having some doubts about where the war is going, how long it will take, how long it's going to take, and in the meantime, some countries, the global south, so to speak, going in different direction. So, to this kind of context, I'm going to ask Ambassador Daly to maybe go first, 10 minutes or so, if you like, up to you, with some flexibility. The direction and dynamics of the war, the Russian war against Ukraine. Ambassador Daly.
Thank you very much. I may need a little bit of flexibility, but I hope not much. Mr. Dean, Excellencies, friends, it's a great pleasure to be here, and I want to thank everybody for attending today, and I want to thank everybody involved in the organization of this seminar, which is the fourth in our series of seminars, EU-ISIS organized seminars. And this falls within a period when we are in fact celebrating very much the birth date of the European Union in 2 weeks' time, the 9th of May. Firstly, in terms of looking back over the year, a number of thoughts occur. Obviously, do a quick stock taking of how the year has gone. I also have been struck by a number of psychological traps, which we can sometimes fall into. And I've also been struck by some strategic miscalculations, I think, which have been made by the Kremlin in relation to invading Ukraine. And then I think we end up with the question, so what type of solution? I mean, where do we go and so on? Very briefly, a stock-taking of the unjustified and illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine 1 year on. At the human level, something like 18,800 civilians have been killed or injured. Over 1,000 children have been killed. There are large refugee flows out of Ukraine. There are 4 million refugees from Ukraine in the EU, and there's something like 1.5 million internally displaced persons in the Ukraine, and there's something like 18 million Ukrainians needing humanitarian assistance. At the economic level, we've seen the destruction of infrastructure, of factories, of agricultural land, all of this having wide impacts, including at the global level, where we see global food security has been affected. We also see some impacts on energy. And the basic point I want to make in relation to all of that destruction of lives and of property and of economy is that nothing justifies all this death and destruction and dislocation. nothing justifies all of the economic costs which the Russian invasion has placed on Ukraine, on Europe, and on the rest of the world. Secondly, in relation to some psychological traps which can be easy for us to fall into, one is to think that, especially in Asia or other parts of the world far away from Europe, it's perhaps easy to think that this is a war far away somewhere in Europe. This has nothing to do with us here in Asia or elsewhere. Obviously, this is not the case. This is not just a European war. It's very much an attack on all of us everywhere in the world. And it's an attack against the international order that we have created for ourselves, based on the UN Charter and territorial integrity, sovereignty, and so on, all of these principles. And it poses a basic question about the conduct of international relations. Are we to conduct international relations based on law and order, or on simply might is right? Military aggression, it should not be acceptable and should not be allowed to pay off in this way. And of course, there are many hotspots around the world, including in Asia, and I think none of us would want those issues to be resolved through this type of action by large countries, let's say. And then, of course, you have the global food insecurity. I mean, Russia restricting its own grain exports at a certain moment, Russia blocking exportation from Ukraine. As the EU, we have adapted quickly to create what we call solidarity lanes, which are transport lanes across the European Union, enabling Ukraine to export its products. And this has ensured that something like about 30 million tons of agricultural products have been able to reach the world market, notwithstanding the blockade. And of course, the EU supports the Black Sea Grain Initiative. All of these are very important. A second trap is what you could call the trap of false equivalence. I mean, this is not a war between two countries over some disagreement or other, where you can say both sides should de-escalate the situation. This is a case where there's a very clear aggressor, Russia, and a very clear victim, Ukraine. An invader and an invaded, attack and self-defense. And we need to be, I think, clear about this. I mean, if Russia stops fighting, then there's no war. If Ukraine stops fighting, then we don't know what happens to Ukraine. So we have to be clear about this and not fall into this trap of false equivalence. The third trap is almost impossible to avoid, which is it's been very difficult to comprehend the full magnitude of what's happening. It's quite hard to believe that this is happening. And we have had especially in Europe, I would say, we've had to learn to think the unthinkable. We had all thought that this type of imperialistic war was something confined to the past. We'd never imagined that a permanent member of the UN Security Council, the highest body supposed to guarantee world peace, that it would invade its neighbour. So we've all had to learn to think the unthinkable. In relation to strategic miscalculations by President Putin, I would say there are some miscalculations vis-à-vis the war and vis-à-vis the European Union. About the war, it's clear that the lightning war, the blitzkrieg approach, as it is called, it has not worked militarily, as you have mentioned. I mean, instead of military success in a couple of weeks, the war has now become a war of attrition, and we don't know how long that will last. Politically also, the blitzkrieg approach has not worked. Instead of the Ukrainian people accepting a newly imposed Russian regime, they've been fighting fiercely to defend their country. And instead of reducing the footprint of NATO, the war has convinced two traditionally military neutral countries in Europe to apply to join NATO. So there's been a serious miscalculation, I think, from the part of the Kremlin. Now, miscalculations about the European Union. It was felt that the EU would collapse into disunity in the face of the challenges, that we would reject the huge numbers of refugee flows, that the EU economy would collapse because of our dependence on Russian energy. Again, wrong. The EU has acted with great unity. Since February last year, we have launched 10 rounds of sanctions targeting Russia. These require unanimity across 27 member states of the European Union. We've mobilized more than 50 billion euro to support Ukraine last year, and 17 billion to European Union member states for hosting refugees. We've jointly financed for the first time the delivery of military equipment to a country at war, and we offer to train 30,000 Ukrainian soldiers under a European flag. And politically, the European Union has accepted the Ukraine as a candidate country for membership. So Europe has had a very united response in relation to these challenges. And of course, there are always different opinions here and there and so on, but what matters is what we collectively, as 27 countries, agree to do. On the refugee front, as I said, the EU currently hosts 4 million Ukrainian refugees. And these have been welcomed across the European Union, not only in the member states close or closer to Ukraine geographically, but also at the furthest ends of the EU. For example, there are 76,000 Ukrainian refugees in my own country, in Ireland, or there are 58,000 refugees in Portugal, the far western member states of the European Union. On the energy front, the weaponization of energy by Russia is a very difficult challenge for the European Union. We are rising to that challenge. We're making exceptional efforts to get rid of almost all our dependence on Russian fossil fuels. And the war is having an immediate catalytic impact on things we have been doing already for a number of years, but which now are getting hugely accelerated. Greater energy efficiency, more renewable energy, switching of energy suppliers away from Russia to other partners. So here you see something very much a strategic mistake on the part of Russia. I mean, the European Union will never go back to placing itself in such a position of dependency on Russian energy. And of course, the economy in Europe has not collapsed. We had growth of 3.4% last year. This year, it will be a lot less. It will be 0.5%. Next year, it will be almost 3 times that. That brings to the question of what type of a solution can we be looking at? And of course, the European Union welcomes the UN General Assembly resolution on the principles of the Charter of the United Nations, underlying a comprehensive, just and lasting peace in Ukraine. This resolution, back in 2 months ago, was adopted with the overwhelming support of the UN membership, almost 3/4 of the UN membership. In this resolution, the member states of the UN reaffirm their commitment to the territorial integrity of Ukraine within its internationally recognized borders. The resolution demands that the Russian Federation immediately, completely and unconditionally withdraw all of its military forces. It calls for a cessation of hostilities. It calls for the return of civilians, including children, forcibly transferred and deported. And it calls to ensure the accountability for the most serious crimes under international law. It is clear that only a comprehensive and just solution in line with the UN principles has any hope of bringing lasting peace to Ukraine. And this is what 3/4 of the UN membership has voted for. Now, in relation to the aspect of the international rules-based order, which is often raised, I mean, is this a Western imposition on the rest of the world? Where are the voices of the South, and so on? I think it's important to remember that we all participate in the UN system. One very pertinent example, both because of its importance and of its regional aspect, is we all know the importance of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Very important all over the world, but especially in Asia, perhaps. Who negotiated this? The chairman of the drafting committee negotiating that convention, first chairman, Prince Juan of Thailand. Second chairman, Hamilton Amarasinghe from Sri Lanka. Third chairman, who concluded the negotiations, Ambassador Tommy Koh of Singapore. So let us not fall into the trap of thinking, oh no, this is all of this international rule stuff is something imposed from the West. Other aspect is that you can have another seminar on the importance of the UN, including its imperfections. Obviously, the UN is something which can be improved. There is a vibrant debate about reform and so on. And all of that is healthy and necessary. But that should not cause us to fall into the trap of thinking that, no, the UN doesn't work, it can't work, it will never work, it's not worth it, and so on. I mean, the alternative to operating on the basis of international rules and law, which we all agree to, which we all abide by, or should abide by, the alternative to that is what we're seeing in Ukraine today. And that is not an attractive alternative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador David. You laid out a compelling case of the wrongs of the Russian aggression, war against Ukraine. It's certainly an existential threat in Europe, but it has wider global implications. If you don't mind, Ambassador Ostrom, I'll just fall back a little bit, and I think Kun Karuna is set up now. And Kun Karuna, I wonder if you, we will okay on time. Kun Karuna, ได้ยินไหมครับ Can you hear us? If you can hear us, you're on the ground in Kiev. Hello. And,
Hello. Good morning.
How are you? Good. Very early morning.
Okay, I'm just recovering from the cold because the weather here keep changing. When we were arriving 4 days ago, it was really gloomy and rainy, and we were in the sort of on the border, and the rain was sizzling whole day. So I got a bit sick, and now I'm recovering. I'm back in Kiev.
Okay, good to hear that. And Kun Karuna is actually an old friend. This is a great occasion for us to be in touch again. Kun Karuna, maybe for the next 10 minutes, just give us some feel. How is it, the situation there where you are? Give us some flavor.
I have few points to make here, Ajahn. Right now, I think the whole situation, people are looking or keeping an eye on what we call spring offensive. Spring offensive means that Ukrainian will strike back Russia and try to retake all the land that Russian take in 4 regions, and perhaps including Crimea too, which is Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson. And now they are unusually quiet. And people are saying because of before counteroffensive or some big operation, they try to keep everything a secret. Nobody really know what's gonna happen or when gonna happen, but we expect the counteroffensive gonna happening in the south, because if they want to take Crimea back or the south back, that area would make more sense. In terms of kind of support, when I was here, we witnessing the visit of the NATO General Secretary, Mr. Jens Stoltenberg, and also a few head of state here. But in general, Ukrainian people kind of, yeah, they're looking for counteroffensive, but they expect the long will get going for another year or two. They didn't expect or hope that counteroffensive will eventually end this war. They're expecting the long war. So I would say the mood of people here is quite upbeat, but it's also quite uncertain about future. But they kind of don't talk about it. They're just living day by day and try to do the best they can. Everyone is helping each other. So this is the kind of the mood of the people here. And I was in Kharkiv region in the past 3 or 4 days. And it's quite interesting because when I was there, some fighting happening because of the Russian just accidentally dropped their bomb on their town, Belgorod, which is not far from Kharkiv. I think it's about 40, 50 kilometers. So it was a little bit of intense around that border. So, and I think it was 2 nights ago, some of our team were waking up at night because of the bombing drop into Kharkiv and into town. But we woke up in the morning, people just continue their life as usual. I mean, people kind of, they're not afraid anymore, but they're just angry. So this is the whole mood and situation. I think it overall, people are kind of, how to say, not expecting the end of the war and try to live their life as best as they can. And another thing I want to point out, I heard the ambassador was talking about the effect of the war, like refugee and the price of the commodities and goods around the world. One thing that I don't think a lot of people are pointing out yet is the effect of the people who live around the area, especially the area which has been liberated. If you remember last year in September, the Kharkiv region was liberated by the Ukrainian force, and now that area is back to Ukraine. But but the big problem still remain. The biggest one would be the landmine. They expected around almost 200,000 square kilometers of land in Ukraine, especially in the east and the northeast, are covered by landmine. So we were in a village and we were told not to walk off the path that they decide because of it's full of landmine around there. And the problem is people are able to come back home, but they're not able to start their farming, or even start to live as they wish because they're surrounded by the landmine, and they don't expect this problem will go away in 10 or 20 years. And I think this is one of the biggest problem. Even you able to push back Russia from your land, but it will take a long time to actually continue the life as you used to do. So I think this is one of the thing that Ukrainians are trying to sort it out. I mean, apart from fighting the Russian on the front.
Okay, thank you very much. Gruna, let me ask you, let me interject a little bit. Thank you very much, by the way. You're doing a great job. Very rare for us to have Thai media in the area. So your sense is that the morale, the spirit of the people is still very strong, yeah? Still very strong. And you're describing...
They have no choice.
You're describing kind of an everyday defiance that is consistent with what the EU Ambassador David Daly has just presented, that the Ukrainians are in it for the long haul. They kind of resigned to accept that this will go on for a long time. And the European Union is also fully behind them. What do you sense, what would be an acceptable in-game or acceptable kind of destination for Ukrainian people and officials that you've come across? What do they want? Do they want all the Donbass back and then all the Crimea back? And then that's what they will settle for? What would they settle for?
They will settle for like nothing less than taking all the territory back, including Crimea. I think now Crimea are really back in focus, because before we heard only Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson. But more and more I heard about Crimea, that they really aiming to take Crimea back as well. So they don't settle for less. They want all the territory back. That's it.
What are their views? I mean, from officials and people that you've come across so far, how do they see the role of the UN, US, UK, NATO, or even Asia, ASEAN? What do they think of the international roles and support?
Funny enough, yesterday I was talking to one of the fighter. I mean, I've been talking to a lot of people who fight on the front line, not really high-ranking official yet, and they refuse actually to talk about what they want more from the international community. They would say it's not our role. Our role is just to be here and fight. But they also receive a lot of support from a private entity. I mean, they will be connecting with people who are individual or private company to send the staff like drone or whatever. So I would say, like, in my experience here, and only people who I encounter and talk with was only people who are on the ground. So they're not really talking much about, I mean, they appreciate the help from international community, but they're not really talking a lot about it, except something like air defense system, for example. They were so pleased to have the Patriot arriving, I think 4 or 5 days ago, and also Leopard 2s and that kind of thing. But in the big picture, they're not really talking about that much from what people I encounter with.
Just a last question in this round, a quick one. You touched on the humanitarian crisis. You mentioned the landmines. This is going to be a long-term crisis. And then you also mentioned how the reconstruction of Ukraine, the eventual reconstruction, will take a long time with a lot of resources.
Yeah.
But for what you see, what are the daily lives of people like? Do the children, do they go to school normally? Do people go to the grocery market? And how do they prepare food and so on?
The food is not a problem, I would say. You'll be surprised, because apart from siren and here the bomb dropping there and here, people are continuing their life. They go to the restaurant and but they go home early, like 8 or 9, everything will be dark. In Kharkiv, for example, it's curfew and people just put off their lights because they don't want to be targeted. And you know, Saturday and Sunday they go to the park. If it's no siren or whatever, they just try to continuing and I think it's very interesting to see how they adapt their life. In Kharkiv, for example, because it's quite close to the border, the bus stop they design in the way it's like a bunker, because a lot of people got killed at the bus stop, right? So right now the bus stop is built in the way that you can run into kind of concrete box that inside have internet, have Wi-Fi and CCTV to see when the bus is arriving. They find a way to live on. I mean, there's so many ways that I didn't mention, but this is example of like the Ukrainian is very good in adapting and just keep going, because they say it's only way to take the revenge of Russia is to show that we can continue our life.
Okay, thank you very much. Kun Karuna, please stay tuned. Please stay there, and then we'll continue this conversation here. But I'm going to come back to you. Please feel free to add anything that you see or even disagree with. Okay, we'll come back to you in a bit, maybe a couple more rounds of Ambassador Ostrom, and then Tantu Kasit. So from this account from Kun Karuna, and by the way, she's a veteran journalist. Going back to many years, I think if I may say 3 decades, in the 1990s, she's very well known on the TV station we had here in independent television, ITV, and since then she's still been involved with the media, very prominent. For her account, suggests to me that Ukrainians, they know what they're in it for. They're going to go all the way. Now, Crimea, the territories, this is the big issue. But for them, from what Kun Karuna said, this is going to be a long, prolonged, protracted battle, because I don't imagine the Russians conceding either any of these areas, right, without a fight. So from Sweden's perspective, Ambassador Ostrom, I mean, we now have the 31 members in NATO. Finland has become the newest, the 31st member of NATO, and Sweden is in line. And it's also very near Sweden. So what's your outlook on the direction, the dynamics, from where in your country, but also broadly?
Well, thank you, Professor Tuttinan. But I will try to answer that question. It's not particularly easy. But let me start by also saying that how much I appreciate and value this opportunity to come here today, to discuss, to compare, and to explain what is happening in Ukraine, and also the Swedish and European views. And maybe on your last one, I would like to say that last question, or you touched upon, and we heard from Kun Karuna also on possible. I mean, we're in for the long run, and I would also like to add there that who am I? Who are we to tell Ukraine what to accept given the current circumstances? Any solution, any negotiation that would take place now would only serve the interest of Russia. So what gives the representatives of the Global South the right to tell Ukraine what to accept at this juncture? I think that is very important to keep in mind. Sweden and Ukraine. I will probably repeat some of the things that's been mentioned by my esteemed EU colleague. And that's not only because European countries are aligned on this. And I would like to also say that I do not agree that we have growing differences, at least not on the fundamental issues. I think that EU and its member states stand united on all of the important things. The war in Ukraine, the war on Ukraine, the Russian war, is not only unjustifiable. In my view, it's also unforgivable. I think that is also something that we should keep in mind. Again, let us be reminded, let us not forget that what we are discussing is in fact the most clear-cut military aggression and breach of territorial integrity that we have seen since, I believe it was in August 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait. This is important to keep in mind, since that in itself speaks for the seriousness of the situation. It is also important since the aggressor, the Russian Federation, of course claims something completely different. I was reminded this morning about a proverb that goes, you can sometimes fool some people, but you cannot fool everyone all the time. Russia is not even calling it a war. Russia is calling it a special military operation. And yes, it is special, but not for the reasons that Russia would like us to think. Let me explain very shortly why I think it's special. Some of you might have heard our German colleague, Ambassador Georg Schmidt. He has often pointed at two main things that makes this war special, and two main differences. First one is that we have a permanent member of the Security Council, the Russian Federation, on several occasions threatening to use its nuclear arsenal. That we don't have anywhere else in the world. Two, there is an ongoing annexation of land, which is also making this different from other wars and conflicts. And this started already in 2014 with Crimea. And again, who are we to tell Ukraine to let Crimea go? It is a blatant violation, as mentioned, of the independence, of the sovereignty, and the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and thus a most serious violation of the Charter of the United Nations. It is also the most serious threat to European security that we've had since the World War II. Why is that? Well, because it's not only an attack on Ukraine, it's an attack on the European security order, the rules-based international order. So it's actually threatening the liberty of the rest of Europe. And I personally believe that Mr. Putin, he will not stop at Ukraine if he's given the opportunity. Those are the reasons why the EU and Sweden stand united with Ukraine. And our support remains unwavering, and we will keep on doing this for as long as it takes. I think it's crucial, and you mentioned, Professor, that this is also for many European countries, this is something that is of an existential nature. Not least for Finland and Sweden. Finland, who has been invaded by Russia many times before, and Sweden, who has fought 11 wars against Russia. That's over a very long period of time, but still. We believe that all countries who are in support of the rules-based order, who believe in the UN Charter, and who don't want to be invaded by its neighbors, need to speak up against this aggression and continue to do so. And many do, as shown in the various UN resolutions that we have had. The latest in the General Assembly called for an end of the war and demanded Russia's immediate withdrawal, and it was also supported by Thailand among 141 countries. I personally believe that there are moments in history when you have a moral obligation to take sides. And I think what's happening in Ukraine over the last 14 months are one of those moments. I think there is a moral imperative here, and that applies to all of us. Yes, and then we have all the consequences for my country and for other European countries. We have applied for NATO membership and so on, and I'm happy to take questions on that, of course, also. The simple answer is, of course, that we had no choice but to do that. And we are hoping that very soon we will become also a full-fledged member. We have this invitee status for the moment, and hopefully soon we will become a full-fledged member. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador Ostrom. I want to let me move to Ambassador Kasit and Kun Karuna. When I come back after this, we'd like to ask you as a Thai citizen covering for the media in Ukraine and also living in Thailand, Southeast Asia neighborhood with us in an organization, how should we kind of perceive, view, treat and handle the Russian war against Ukraine? We'll come back to that for a local, regional outlook for us. I come to Ambassador Kasit. Ambassador Ostrom, you mentioned European security. You also mentioned the last time you said there was, in your view, the last major invasion was Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. I think it was August 2nd, 1990. And it was reversed, of course, by a US-led UN coalition. I have to tell you, though, that a lot of people in this region and people in the global south, they will look at this, and this written in articles and in the news that the US invaded Iraq in March 2003. Ultimately, it was not justifiable, and it has not been condemned as such. But people pay attention. People remember that. A lot of people remember that. It's not to say that doesn't exonerate or give legitimacy for what Russia's done. It completely is a violation. But we've seen this kind of violation before. It's not been called out in the same way, and many people would think and feel that way around here. Now, Ambassador Kasit, you've been foreign minister, and you also have been involved with the ASEAN parliamentarians and on Myanmar. There's a civil war in Myanmar. So just come to you. A year ago, we were on a panel at the CCT a little bit over a year ago, right after the invasion. Ambassador Kasit made some comments, and there was very strong reactions from the audience. And his comments at that time, if I may bring it up again, Ambassador Kasit, was that this war is going to be very bloody, nasty, and so on, and perhaps there could be a way to kind of not go there, to not go there. More than a year has gone by. Ambassador Kasit, what would you say now? This Russian war against Ukraine, it's not our job to call an end to it or see how it would end, but for us sitting here in Thailand, Southeast Asia, how should we kind of react to it after 14 months?
Thank you very much. And thank you to the ambassador and Good Karuna for the information so far. Let me appoint myself as the spokesperson of the Global South, okay, trying to put myself in the position of a Global South citizen and look across the continent to Europe and so on. And what's happening around me and so on is the living cost has gone up, energy price, the food shortage, especially for our fellow global citizens in the Middle East and in the African continent. And we have heard and we have seen a lot of destruction inside Ukraine itself. The internal displaced person of more than 1 million, the refugees in neighboring countries, and the physical destruction and the daily hardship for the children and housewife inside Ukraine and so on. And then at the same time, we continue to hear the pronouncement by the Secretary General of NATO, Stoltenberg, and the pronouncement by the Defense Secretary of the United States, Mr. Austin, General Austin, as well as the President of Ukraine, President Vladimir Zelensky. And the three of them have, I sense it, that they have been saying similar things, that the Russians and Putin can be defeated. And we will go to the brink of getting the Russian not only defeated, but out of Ukraine altogether, not only on the eastern part of Ukraine, but also Crimea. So the intention is to go for an all-out war. And also it's a bit of a brinkmanship that the Russians, on the wake of defeat in the near future, will not dare to use tactical nuclear weapons. But all of this is about defeat and victory, discarding the destruction and the hardship that have been going on for the Ukrainian people in particular, and for the spillovers into Russia itself because of the sanctions, and also because of the, I think, the uncertainty of life and the economic and social hardship in Europe and the world at large, including Thailand. How can it be that world leaders only continue to talk about war? What about the peace element of the human life? And why can't we start from the premise that we can work toward peace? And in this sense, I just would like to recall that during the height of the Vietnam War, a lot of atrocities have been going on between the Viet Cong, the Viet Minh, the North Korean troops on one side, and the American soldiers, and the South Korean and the Thai soldiers, together with the South Vietnamese soldiers on one side. Killings every day and hardship for both the North Vietnamese as well as for the Southern Vietnamese. But there were a series of negotiations of subtle diplomacy were going on in Paris between Henry Kissinger and Pham Van Dong, I think. So my point to the gathering here is that why don't we do this in a parallel thing? Start the negotiation by fighting in preparation for the counter-offensive, and counter-offensive can go. And the fact that our Chinese friends, with now support of Brazilian president, and I think the Indian leadership have also been thinking in a similar manner of trying to do something for the peacemaking and for the negotiation to start. And my proposal is that for China, India, Brazil, Turkey, and the EU Commission, the five to get together and to talk to one another on how to come out with a package for peace negotiation. A bit of amendments and changes to the 12-point proposals of the Chinese government and make it better. And bringing in, I think, the various aspects of various UN conventions and the UN resolutions of the past 1 year and so on. So this big five can and should be in the position to offer a sort of a set of peace proposals for negotiation to start, and at the same time for the UN to think about peacekeeping operation inside Ukraine when the ceasefire starts. So my point is that we have to start thinking about the peace process. I think for us as civilized people and peace-loving people, we have to be thinking on this line. I am very much against the pronouncement of the President of the United States and some senior members of the member states of the EU. I was surprised that a Green Party member who had become the foreign minister of Germany has been behaving so far from the green ideology and philosophy. more and more to the far right. It is quite surprising to me indeed that the green people in Europe should be working for the peace and not for more war and so on. But that is a personal observation. But the point is that we have to think about peace and not more war. That should be the cause of what we all should do together. And second, we should all stop this blame game. You know, one cannot start the whole thing on the day, on the 24th of February when the Russians moved into Ukraine. One has to go back to what were the causes, what were the provocations and so on. And the causes and provocation would be part of the agenda for the peace negotiation. That's what we should be working together. Because I have been a politician, and I also do belong to the realist school. When a neighbor has a problem, you cannot ignore the concerns, the interests, the fundamental interests of your neighbor. You have to take that into consideration. And when Vietnam invaded and occupied Cambodia, we were not talking about the Vietnamese coming to help the international community to get rid of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, but we were talking about geopolitics and real politics, that no one particular country, for whatever reasons, could invade the other country. And if Vietnam were to try to get rid of the Khmer Rouge, it could go to the UN or talk to the Thai government, can we work together with the international community and with the UN to get rid of the Khmer Rouge, but not to send hundreds of tanks, Vietnamese into Cambodia. And then all the tanks came finally at the Thai border, and Thailand cannot stand aside. It has to oppose. And it did succeed in getting even the Chinese to work with us to oppose the Vietnamese occupation of Cambodia. So my point is that we have to take the Russian concern, which started since the end of the Cold War, from Gorbachev to Yeltsin to Medvedev and to Putin and so on. But just to ignore that, then you are not taking into consideration the other side's concern. And I always have to go back to the Monroe Doctrine or to the Cuba crisis and so on, and put that into the heart of the Russian leadership side. And then, so in that sense, when we understand that, then we can sit down and talk to one another. I think that should be, the course of action, and that should be, the joint position of the Golden South. We do not have that part of the moral values or the universal values of democracy and human rights and self-determination in our DNA when it comes to the foreign policy posture. We are talking about our own very survival of economic and socio-development. We have not become that sophisticated as yet, and most of our respective countries do not have a democratic regime. Most of us are authoritarian, and all of this and so on. Give us the time. Once we have become more democratic, then we can share the aspiration of the Western world on the universal values and work with it. But at this moment, no, we cannot go along. We cannot see the fight for democracy in Ukraine. But it's about our food costs, energy costs, the disruption of the supply chain, and so on. And why not big powers talk to one another? It's the duty of the big powers to talk to one another and not to fight one another or to use proxy to gain the advantages and all of this and so on. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ambassador Kasit. Look, I know that these comments would not go down well in Brussels and Washington, London and Stockholm. But after 14 months, I have to say, that distance does matter. I mean, I think the appetite in opposition against the aggression, against the war, the Russian war, is certainly still there. But I think now also there are more sentiments coming up from the rest of the world that there are other considerations they are paying attention to. Ambassador Kasit mentioned about the bread and butter issues, about inflation, about economic hardships, and so on. So I know you have some reactions, Ambassador, and I want to also devote some time. We have about 25 minutes. So I'm going to keep the last 15 minutes or so for the audience participation, but then for the next 10 minutes, I'll come to you for quick reactions if you like, and then I'm going to come to Kun Karuna Bokamsi, Ambassador Oscar.
Thank you so much, Professor. It's always good to have a panel with different views, and I have to say that I fundamentally disagree with our dear Excellency Kun Kasit not on the need for thinking about peace, because we should always think about peace, but not peace on these terms. And it's not the responsibility of Ukraine to cater for the world's cheaper food prices or energy prices. Let's get the responsibilities right first. And I have to say that the Russian Federation's concerns, in my view, they are not legitimate at all. And let's not forget who started this war. It's not Ukraine that is fighting in Russia, it's Russia that is fighting in Ukraine. And this is fundamental. And this is to have an imposed negotiations on Ukraine that will only lead to further conflict, and it will not be a lasting peace whatsoever. And in my view, and this is my personal view, there can never be peace between Russia and Ukraine as long as Mr. Putin is in power.
But I'll go back to the question of peace. We all want peace. The UNGA resolution, however, is very, very important in understanding what should be the context for a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace. Because anything other than that will not last. And so that's why it's very important that we, as the international community, that we continue to put the pressure on where it deserves to be put, which is namely on Russia. Now, I also, with great respect, don't also agree with all of what Kun Kasit has said. We shouldn't speak about defeat and victory. No, we should speak about attack and self-defense. That's what we're talking about. And of course, it takes two to tango. You want to have peace negotiations, peace talks, and so on. Okay, but you need two to tango. And so far there's absolutely no evidence of anybody on the Russian side wishing to have those talks. So I think clearly right now is not an appropriate moment for talks, but it is always the appropriate moment to be thinking about peace and how can it be brought about. But this is not going to come easily or quickly.
Okay, thank you. When we come back to you, maybe you can react to some of the peace initiatives that have been launched or suggested, and see what you think. Kun Karuna, we're in Thailand and Southeast Asia. I see two risks mounting here. One is a growing gap between the rest of the world and the European theater, and this is Russian war. So in ASEAN, I can really sense a little bit more distance after a year. And second, there's a risk of escalation. Finland joins NATO. I don't think that the Kremlin will be very pleased with that. So Kun Karuna, what do you think, being on the ground there? I know you said the Ukrainians the resolve is steely resolve, very strong, firm. But for us here in Southeast Asia, how is this going to affect us? How should we be looking at it? Kun Karuna.
I want to make 2 points here. I think I want to talk a bit about peace first. Everyone want to have peace. I mean, people here want to have peace. I also want to have peace. We're not more war monger. And I think the peace can be achieved very easily. Peace is started when Russia stopped what they're doing. Very clear. This is a situation where it's a very black and white. It's a territorial integrity has been violated. And I think for us, for Thai, for Southeast Asia, the war seems to be very far, but it's not far. And I'm not a policy expert, but I think we are living in a very volatile and unstable world, and is the world is getting very complicated and fragile. I don't dare to lecture the policymaker what to do, but I think whatever we do, there's only one thing that we should hold close to our heart is a principle. This war is not justified. And whatever that's gonna happen, let it be peace negotiation or whatever. I think one thing that we should agree, I mean, whether you are Thai or Cambodian or Indonesian, is we have to respect territorial integrity. I know geopolitics is there, but it's nothing new. I mean, people here knows as well that they are like, after the collapse of Soviet Union, they have like a fragile relationship with the neighbor, as we know. But it doesn't mean that it's justified for a country to send the army to another country. That's all I want to say.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I was saying earlier that being in a war area, teaching about conflict and war is very different than being in the area. So be careful, stay safe from Corona. We're still going to come back to you. The floor is open now for questions and comments. Please keep them brief. I would just say to the ambassadors here that maybe, is it fair to say that maybe it's too early for peace talks because of the battlefield dynamics? I'll just leave that at that. You can maybe include in your comments. We have first question from our Ukrainian representative.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank the Institute of Securities and International Studies and EU mission in Thailand for organizing this very important event. And well, I'm from Ukraine. We would like also just to, next time we are grateful for organizing it, and I would like just to express our desire to participate in the next event dedicated to my country. And of course, I will not be brief, sorry. I have some comments just to what have been said by the distinguished speakers. So, Professor Titinan, so you mentioned about the battle, where is it going. I would like just to specify the battlefield is the whole territory of Ukraine. All people of Ukraine are under attack. All people of Ukraine are in danger, with continuous shelling, with bombardments, with missile attacks everywhere in Ukraine. Ambassador Daly, I fully agree with you that there is, we must define it clearly, that there is the aggressor and there is the country which is exercising its right of self-defense. And there is not a war between Russia and Ukraine, there is aggression against Ukraine. I fully agree with that, and I would like just to continue what you have started, just saying that if Russia stops fighting, there will be no war. If Ukraine stops fighting, unfortunately, there will be no Ukraine. That's why we continue defending ourselves. Otherwise, Ukrainian people might go through genocide and will be eliminated as nation, like many Russian politicians officially declared. Mr. Medvedev, for instance. Ms. Karuna, thank you for being with us just in Ukraine. Thank you for covering the issues in my country. We appreciate that. So you mentioned about spring offensive, which means yes, it is offensive, but in fact this is liberation of Ukraine. We liberate our territory. We want to liberate our territory. We're doing that, by the way. There have been already counter-offensive against the enemy, and we are determined to oust the armed forces of the aggressive country from our territory. Yes, Ambassador Young, thank you so much. I also agree that war is not only unjustifiable, but it will be unforgettable for Ukraine. Well, also speaking about peace. So no country in the world desires peace more than Ukraine. But we also know that the real peace needs to be just and durable. We need real peace, but not appeasement. Our approach to peace initiatives put forward by different countries and leaders is very simple. Any effort aimed at restoring Ukraine's internationally recognized borders, which have been violated by the Russian aggression, is welcomed. Any effort that violates this principle, such as suggesting Ukraine make territorial concessions, is not acceptable for my country, for the people of Ukraine. That's why Ukraine's vision of the path to such peace is very realistic and specific. President Zelensky outlined it in his peace formula, and we urge all nations to support specific points of this initiative aimed at restoring peace in the areas where Russia has shattered it. Finally, Ukrainians, after 14 months of aggression, have become stronger and more united. We have consolidated ourselves around the goal of victory over the aggressor. I call on for continuation of support of Ukraine, political, humanitarian, military. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. There was a couple of more hands. Please, Wilfred. Please tell us who you are first, and then.
Okay. Dr. Wilfred Herman, interested layman. I just want to say thank you to Kun Kasit to mention the elephant in the room. Nobody mentioned the United States up to now. The United States is a major war party, and nobody is really looking at it. The Defense Secretary in March 2022 already said, our aim is not to help Ukraine, but to weaken Russia. There was not much international outcry for that when the change of war target was done. On the same side, now Antony Blinken goes in the direction of more negotiations. Because 3 months ago, one general said, we have to prepare for war with China in 2025. So my question is to the esteemed ambassadors, do we have a déjà vu in history? If you look back, when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the Americans declared victory. They need a new enemy and they choose the Islam. They got heavily defeated in Afghanistan. Now we are in the way of almost celebrating victory about Russia again. So will we head for a major defeat against China? Thank you.
Okay, we'll take that into account for our panelists. Any other, we're going to have a last round here. Any other comment, questions? Okay, if not, I'll just come to this. Maybe the ambassadors of EU and Sweden first. A lot going on here. I mean, a very heavy question about the U.S. and even the U.S. domestic politics itself. They also have differences of opinion. The Republican Party, different dynamics, and many think that if somehow the Republicans get the upper hand, they would concentrate on China, which they have a bipartisan consensus on, but not as much on the Ukraine support. But you know, where do we go from here? I mean, I know that the support, EU, NATO, US, UK, is unwavering, is resolute. At the same time, it's a brinkmanship, right? It's a stalemate. It's a fierce tussle between the two sides, and it can go on long time. What do we, you know, where do we go from here? In view of the question just raised about the role of the US as well.
That was a very easy question. No, but I would like to say the following. What you asked is also implying something that I don't agree with. That is that the war in Ukraine or on Ukraine sort of, for some reason, was provoked. I don't agree with that. I think it was unprovoked. I don't think that there is a hidden agenda of that sort. I'm not denying that certain powers have certain interests and certain agendas, but I think in Ukraine I don't see that. Yeah, I mean that would be my response to that specific question.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Daly. Maybe last remark from you on any of the issues covered so far.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I would agree with Ambassador Estrom. I don't see it in those terms, and the question also reminds me of something else which you mentioned, Professor Titinan, that what about a comment of this European politician or a comment of that politician and so on. We all have our opinions and people express different things. But especially in the European Union, it's very important to understand that within the Union, just as within member states, within any country, within the European Union, there are different voices. Now, on Ukraine, there are almost no differences of opinion. Everybody is behind the EU position. What matters is, what do we agree as 27 sovereign states together as the European Union? That's when you see what the position of the EU is, and not the stray comments of one individual or another. And when you look at that, for example, in relation to peace process, you see EU support for President Zelensky's 10-point plan, and we want to work on that basis. You see the EU support for the UNGA resolution, which sets out the context for any lasting peace, and we want to continue to work with others on that. That context cannot be wished away. And of course, ultimately, it's all very well for the European Union to have a view about what peace in Ukraine might look like, but the ultimate answers must come from Ukrainians. It is their country. So we have to be very, very careful in how we discuss it. We are not moving chess pieces on a chessboard. And I go back to my very, very first point, which is nothing justifies all of this death and destruction and so on that we've witnessed.
Thank you very much. Kun Karuna, stay tuned. I'm going to come to you next after Ambassador Kasit. And you can have the last word to help us wrap up, so stay tuned, please. Ambassador Kasit, last minute or two from you. I mean, you mentioned the role of Brazil, India, China, Turkey. What between all these protagonists in this mix, could there be a third way or some way facilitated by these countries that are not that you mentioned in a way to lead towards some kind of a way forward? Maybe not peace initiative right away, but as a way forward.
Thank you. But before answering your question, my hearts to the friend from Ukrainian. I was ambassador to Moscow as well as to Kiev in 1991 and 1993. So I was aware of what was going on. I went to Kiev many times. I am in love with Kiev as one of the most beautiful cities and so on. Okay, that's the sentimental side of it. Then I was in Bonn and Berlin from 1997 to 2001. And a lot of the NATO expansion and all of this and so on. And I did feel the sentiments and the feelings of many of the Russian leaderships and so on about the NATO expansion. And as I have mentioned that I'm from the realist school, that if the NATO expansion was being perceived negatively by the Russian side as a threat to its very survival, then you ignored it. And then you come out with the excuses, the right of self-determination, sovereignty, Ukraine can do what it wants and so on. Then we are not living in a world of reality. We are living in a world of idealism and principle and so on. And that the end result of it is the attack on the 24th of February. So my point is that if two countries adjacent to one another do have problems, one has to take the other side's concerns and so on into consideration. But that did not take the place because the big elephant was pushing for the brinkmanship towards the Russian border. Let's be real about this and be truthful about it, that without the United States and the negation of the promises from Bush 1 to Clinton to the Bush 2nd and so on, it has not been the case that the Russian concerns were taken into consideration. Oh, fine. If you don't care about that Ukraine has every right to join NATO, EU, and have to have the NATO military forces and so on inside Ukraine to oppose the Russian, fine. But is it realistic? And then that's the end result of it. That is the first point. To answer your question, Professor Titinan, you have to start to think about wanting to negotiate first. You know, we know about the Russian position, they're not going to move out of Ukraine. But you've got to start the negotiation in order to have the Russian out of Ukraine. In exchange for what? Is it the guarantee of Ukraine neutrality and so on? There could be a list of agenda items to see these are the things that we should talk about to come to a final conclusion of peaceful coexistence. But my point is that we have to start with the negotiation while the fighting or the prospect of the more enlargement of the war and so on will be able to happen and so on. And since the Chinese has started, even President Vladimir has his own 10 point and so on, from back to the two. And I think the Putin has come out with some ideas every now and then. So we have the Chinese one, the Ukraine one, the Russian one. Then I think the wisdom of Turkey, of India, of Brazil could come in and let these 5 countries with the EU commissioner and so on sit at a negotiate at the table and to come out with a joint proposal to the antagonists and so on. I think this is what the civilized people must do. You've got to start to do the peace thing while you are preparing for war. But so far it has been, I think, a big gap of not one thing, but the pronouncement is more about war, more about victory and defeat and so on. What's wrong with all of us in this world? What's wrong with our world leadership and so on? That they are warmongering, that they want more blood, more hardship for the Ukrainian people, and by extension to our friends in Africa, in the Middle East, because they have no wheat to consume, or the wheat is too expensive, and all of this and so on. And what about here in Thailand, the electricity cost, and an issue every day in television, newspapers, and so on. We are affected. Why should we be affected? Or we should say we should be affected because we believe in democracy and self-determination and all of this and so on. But what about the reality, being a bit realist and come to the negotiating table? I even propose at times for the ASEAN of the 10 members, and now through the Indonesian chairmanship, to play the peacekeeping role also. Why don't we join the Chinese or the Brazilian and the Indians as the ASEAN one voice to work for the ceasefire and for the peace negotiation? Why not? ASEAN can do that. And we have the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. We have the ASEAN Declaration on Freedom and Neutrality. We have the Declaration on non-nuclear.
Okay, thank you very much.
proliferation. Thank you very much.
Your point is very clear. Thank you very much. We're out of time, but I will give 1 minute to Ambassador Daly to a reaction, and 1 minute or two to you, Khun Karuna, as a last word.
Yeah, I apologize for coming again. I hadn't intended to. Just 3 points very quickly. Firstly, agriculture prices and so on. No war, no blockade of exports from Ukraine. There would be no food security issue. Second point, the European Union is constantly engaged with other partners on this issue of Ukraine seeking a solution. Point number 3, as a counterweight to His Excellency Kun Kasit's experience in Moscow, Kiev and Berlin, just to recount my own experience in Budapest from 96 to 2000. There you saw a country that was hugely enthusiastic about copper fastening its liberalization from the Soviet Union and from the Warsaw Pact, hugely enthusiastic to join NATO. They saw it as that. They saw it as freedom and security reinforced. And I think across the other countries of the former Soviet Union, in that region of Central and Eastern Europe, they saw it in the same way. And that was an enormous political propulsion for those countries to hammer on the door of NATO. Please let us in. Also on the door of the European Union. I have no brief to speak for NATO, but that is what I witnessed in 4 years in Budapest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Daly. Khun Karuna, please help us with your last words, observations, views, wrap up this forum. If the Ukrainians that you've come across there, if they have heard our conversation here at July, what would they say and how would they react to it?
What they would say is like, I mean, the Cold War mentality is like, it's a big problem. I think in reality, regardless who you are, what country you are living in, you cannot invade another country. That's all. And you cannot use any excuse to invade another country. Law has to be respected.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Very consistent with our Ukrainian charge ambassador, acting ambassador, when he said. So I think the being in Ukraine, I think it must be really visible to you, very visible to you, how the Ukrainians are taking this and defying this. So I'm very clear from your, from the tone of your voice, from your remarks.
Yesterday, just one last word for me. Yesterday, I had a conversation from a 20 years old soldier who fights on the front line in Bakhmut. And he has to leave his classroom. He was a university student, law student. And I asked him, like, why would you make such a decision to go to the front line and fight, your enemy? And he said, because I had to. And I said, what about your studying? He said, I'm reading and studying in the bunker. I'm fighting, and then I try to finish my law degree as well. This is a life of young Ukrainian, like 100,000 of them has to be like wasted because of this unlawful action.
Okay, thank you. Very telling. If I may wrap it up this way with kind of a three-pronged upshot. So I think from what we've heard today, there is a danger of escalation. We could see a lot more, things could get a lot worse. I think I sense a growing a bit of disconnect between more countries outside Europe. From a year ago, the appetite, opposition, certainly still against the aggression and the war, but I think that there is some reduced appetite for the length of time, the longer time goes on. And third, I noticed this, from what we've heard, there's going to be attrition and protraction. It's going to be a very nasty and bloody, violent, ongoing back and forth kind of stalemate that will last indefinitely. Unfortunately, that's where we're at. So thank you very much for joining us today. Please join me in thanking all the speakers. And thank you very much, Kun Karuna, for coming in here.